On this person. Thomas Pinckney, who did that report? Nobody remembers all this stuff. Maybe I didn't give it to you. You did. So you already know this, right? That Thomas Pinckney was the guy that Washington sent in 1795 to negotiate this treaty. Very good. Thank you for knowing that. Now, Pinckney was in the opposite position that Jay was, because Pinckney was to go over there and negotiate things that would be favorable to the United States in exchange for our promise not to enter into this conflict. Okay? So Pinckney has a little easier negotiation because he's going over there to negotiate things that would be favorable to the United States in exchange for America promising to stay neutral in the conflict. So when this treaty was signed between Spain and the United States that was negotiated by Thomas Pinckney, here are the things the United States received. Who owned Florida at the time? This is one solid chair. Who owned Florida? Did we have Florida? No, Spain did. And one of the things we gained, there was always this uncomfortable, where is the real border between Georgia and Florida? So one of the things we gained was a favorable borderline between Spanish-owned Florida and American-owned Georgia. So that's one of the things we gained by this treaty from Thomas Pinckney, was a favorable final agreed-upon boundary between Spanish-owned Florida and American-owned Georgia. And we got a pretty good, we got the better end of the deal. Okay? Well, another problem we had, you've heard of the Florida State Seminoles, haven't you? Okay? The Indian tribes in Florida, because they didn't particularly like southern part of Georgia or the western lands, this is kind of what we call the western lands here, they didn't like them so much. So what were the Indians doing to southern part of Georgia and these western lands? They were attacking. And so the second part of the agreement that we received is that Spain guaranteed that they would curb or stop these continued Indian attacks upon southern Georgia and the western lands. So we gained the support of Spain in curbing Indian attacks upon settlements in Georgia and in the western lands. The third thing we got was big, and will end up being even bigger as we go on. We got the right to navigate the Mississippi River freely. And you're probably thinking, well, how come we can't do that now? Well, I'm going to tell you. Now, could we navigate, could we get on the Mississippi River here, Morgan, if we want to? Sure we could, because we own this land here, right? How about up here? Emily, could we get, if we were in what is present-day Illinois, could we get on the Mississippi freely?
No.
Yeah, you could. No, you could, because we owned it. What didn't we own that was really important along the Mississippi? What? That's right. We did not own New Orleans, because New Orleans was a Spanish possession. And if we wanted to use New Orleans, if they would let us, what would they do? Taxes or charge us, okay? So the third thing that we received by this treaty was the right to navigate the Mississippi River freely, which meant that we would have the right to transfer goods at the port city of New Orleans without paying any tariff to Spain, because it doesn't do you a lot to freely negotiate here if you can't get out and get around and get your products where you can sell them, right? So that was crucial. Gaining the right of deposit in New Orleans was very crucial to the United States, so we could trade from the western part, where the western farmers could now float the Mississippi River with their goods down to New Orleans, sail them around Florida, and sell them on the East Coast, which, believe it or not, at the time was much easier than taking mules and wagons and getting over the Appalachians over here. Before, they couldn't go down here without paying a tariff, couldn't afford the tariff. part of the reason why farmers used their corn and grew corn only to make distilled liquor, because it was easy to take this route, because they couldn't go this route. Did any of you think in the back of your mind when we talked about that, why don't they just go around Florida? Anybody think about that? Well, that would be easier. Couldn't, because we couldn't go through New Orleans without paying a large tariff. So that was huge. So with those three things gained, we promised that we would not get in this conflict between France and soon to be Spain against Great Britain. And we gained those three things. Well, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, which is President Washington's farewell address. Okay, he served his time as president, and he's done, and he's going to give a farewell address. He did that in 1796. Now, could he have served a third term as president? Well, he could have served 20 terms if he wanted. That ended in 1947 with the passage of the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution. But he decided he did not want to serve a third term as president by 1796. So during his 2 terms in office, he had actually accomplished 4 major goals that I want to mention before we get to his address. So in 1796, President Washington decides not to serve a third term as President of the United States. And during his 2 terms in office, his administration had accomplished 4 major goals. Number 1, we talked about. His administration set the new nation on solid foundations financially. Okay? Washington's administration set the new nation on solid foundations financially. That was a pretty important goal. Number 2, his administration had organized the machinery of federal government. Did they set up a federal government system? Yes, they did. So they put the nation on sound foundations financially, and they also established a machinery of government. So we had a federal government, transformed those 13 individual governments into one. Third thing he did that was very important during his 2 terms is he avoided war with Great Britain, a war we could least afford at the time. So he avoided war with Great Britain. Did he have to give up a little bit to do that? Yeah, he did. But the 4th thing he did is he gained some of those benefits that he gave up to Great Britain back from Spain when he negotiated the treaty that allowed us to stay neutral in that conflict. So he avoided war with Great Britain when war could least be afforded, and then he received some of those benefits he lost during that negotiation from Spain when he negotiated to stay out of the conflict. Now, as he left office, Washington had 2 major concerns, things that were bothering him. As he left office after serving 2 terms, he had 2 things that were bugging him. One is he did not like the sharp, bitter arguments between who? Very evident, and we talked about it. Go ahead. Hamilton and Jefferson. It really bothered Washington, the sharp, bitter arguments between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. That bothered him. He just did not like the division. Okay, because you had a pretty split division, North and South, led by those 2 guys. That bothered President Washington when he left office. Another thing that he was concerned about is our relations with foreign countries. He was concerned about our relations with foreign countries. Okay? Thought we were a little bit disorganized in that area. So when he gave his when he gave his farewell address to Congress, he urged the American people to avoid these 2 things. He said we need to avoid these 2 things. So as he left office and gave his farewell address, he urged the American people to avoid these 2 things. Number 1, any permanent alliances with any foreign countries. Permanent alliances. because he got in trouble by the permanent alliance that he signed in 1778 with who? France. So he warned the American people, do not put in place any permanent alliances with foreign countries, because they're going to come back and bite you. That was his point. Don't do that, because things changed. Did things change from the French Treaty of 1778? If we'd have gotten to war with Great Britain, who knows what would happen. Second thing he said, and this is interesting because we did not listen, he said, do not allow the formation of political parties. Do not allow the formation of political parties. We didn't listen really in either case.
No, we were very so split up.
Yeah. But he said that. He warned us in 1796. He said, don't get in any permanent alliances with foreign countries and do not form any political parties. With that, we'll finish today with the rise of the two-party system. Just what he told us not to do. The rise of the two-party system. Who are the two parties going to center around, Ivan? Who are the two parties going to center around?
Federalist and Republican.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of yourself. But who are they going to center around?
Hamilton
And
Jefferson.
very good. So the two political parties that rise up are going to center around Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton and his supporters are going to become known as Federalists, and Jefferson and his supporters are going to be known as Republicans. So the whole two-party system that Washington said to stay away from comes into being, and he hated the conflicts between Hamilton and Jefferson, and they just go against everything he said, and these two political parties, which he told them not to do, centered around the two people that weren't getting along the most, and obviously there were many differences between Hamilton and his Federalists and Jefferson and his Republicans. Okay? Many differences. Tell you a little bit about the Federalist Party. You can compare the two. We'll talk about the Federalist Party first. Now you see how this compares to today. Just think about it. Number one, the Federalist Party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. Number one, the Federalist Party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. The party had little faith in the ability of the average person to govern themselves. Which leads to number two, means the party wants to give power to who? Which type? No, but not the government so much, but to the non-average person or wealthy. Okay, so number two, the Federalist Party wants to give power, political power, to the wealthy people. They didn't think the average person had the ability to govern themselves. It would be the wealthy that would govern. Now this is interesting. The third thing the Federalists believe in is they want to create a strong federal government under the control of the wealthy. They want to create a very, very strong federal government under the control of the wealthy. They wanted to create a strong federal government under the control of the wealthy. Fourth attribute of the Federalist Party is they supported the National Bank of the United States. They supported the Bank of the United States. Supported. Obviously, because who created it? Okay? Number five, the Federalist Party was strongest in New England, the New England states, and all the states along the eastern seaboard. This is where you saw your Federalists. New England and along the eastern seaboard. Because those were your, what type of people live there? Wealthy. Okay? So the party was strongest in New England and along the Atlantic seaboard. Number six, what type of people were members of the Federalist Party? wealthy merchants. Who else? Wealthy lawyers, wealthy manufacturers, wealthy church leaders. Reminding you of those that we knew as what during the American Revolution? Loyalists. Okay? Same type of people. So the Federalist Party included wealthy merchants, wealthy lawyers, wealthy manufacturers, and wealthy church leaders. Those that were considered loyalists during the American Revolution. And number 7, according to the members of the Federalist Party, the party represented, quote, the rich, the well-born, and the able. So again, according to its members, the Federalist Party represented, quote, the rich, the well-born, and the able. Rich, well-born, and able. Now let's compare that to the Republican Party and see if you see any differences. Okay? So if the Federalist Party had no faith in the ability of the average person to run the government, what do you think the Republicans do? They have great faith in the ability of the average person to run the government. Great faith. It's totally polar opposite. Number 2, since the Federalists favor a strong federal government, what do you think the Republicans favor? A weak federal government and a strong state government. So this is the opposite. They favor a limited federal government and a strong state government. Another attribute of the Republican Party is they favored guarantees of individual liberties. Favored guarantees of individual liberties. What does that mean? If you're guaranteed individual liberties, do you have the individual liberties in this class? Can Delaney raise her hand and say, Mr. Durr, I think this is the answer without me snapping her head off? Yeah, she has. You could set wherever you wanted when you came in the first day. That's a liberty. Liberty, or another word for what? Freedom. Yeah. Okay. Another attribute of the Republican Party is they wanted all the people to have a controlling power of the country. And why wouldn't they? Because the average person made up what percent of the population of the United States, do you think, at the time? What 90% of the population were not the rich and wealthy. They were the average person. So the Republican Party wanted all the people in the country to control the country. And why not? Because the average person made up about 90% of the population, right? What do you think was the party's philosophy of the Bank of the United States? Republican Party. No, very much against it. Very much against the Bank of the United States.
Why?
Because it represented what? And the wealthy. They saw it as, that's a good question, Emily, they saw it as representing the wealthy and was going to do things for the wealthy. Okay? Well, by 1794, most of the people in the United States had chosen the political party that they had preferred and were going to support. So you had pretty much everybody picking what they were by 1794. So from this point on, from 1794 until the present, political life in this country has revolved around the two-party system. I mean, it started way back then. You've got to give it credit for lasting that long, right? But Washington said, no, let's not do it. We've been doing it for hundreds of years, and I'm not sure where it's gone. Now, I will say this, and then it doesn't have anything to do with politics, in my opinion, on who should win this election.